So now we are excited to announce, now that I got all those tweets out and all that crap, um, we have been working with Google for the last few months. So the 20 of you on here are amongst the first to know. We've been working on Google. We haven't been with Google. We haven't been allowed to say anything up until now, and Google Compute Engine now supports always-on availability groups.
Hurrah!
Ta-da! For those of you who haven't seen before, Google Compute Engine is a lot like AWS EC2 or Microsoft Azure VMs. They're virtual machines, so you can build anything you want inside there, but Google is just starting to make it easier for you to do always-on availability groups. So they've got a white paper with instructions on their side that's like step-by-step with stuff like terminals, commands, PowerShell, all this. And then Tara has been knocking out a huge white paper on how to go build it, PowerShell commands, how to test it, test failovers back and forth. And Erik has not been sitting around idle either. What have you been up to, Erik?
I have been talking about performance testing cloud VMs, how to benchmark your workload, your current, what we're calling cloudless workload, versus what you may expect to get in the cloud. So like different ways to measure your server, you know, with taking backups, running CheckDB, if you're stupid enough to do index rebuilds, how fast you're doing index rebuilds. Also measuring your current workloads, looking for bottlenecks and wait stats there, and how to set up a VM on the other side to get it, you know, hopefully commensurate performance out of a cloud VM without breaking the bank. So that's what I've been doing. And unfortunately, I broke the bank every single time, asked Brent.
Yeah, we were working with Google, and they credited our account, our Google Compute Engine account. They put, you know, a couple $1,000 worth of credits in one account, and then we ended up setting up all the VMs in a different account. So we ended up cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Google's working through the credit card fund now.
We are not accountants.
I can use a credit card, but yeah, no, it's very fun. And you know, what I like about the white paper that Erik's putting together is there's all this advice out there on how do you replay a workload, how do you measure your workload, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard to replay a workload. Richie, when you were... Richie, as you were going through and doing the architect thing throughout the course of your career, what percentage of the time are people able to replay workloads and repeatedly gauge performance?
0.
Yeah, it's really hard. So talk about the approach that you took in the white paper, Erik.
Well, there are a few different ways you can look at stuff. So one is, you know, sort of like we're going to talk about, is that every day your server is running its own sort of performance benchmarks. When you take backups, you run CheckDB, you do index maintenance. These are all stuff that's built into SQL Server that you're doing every day that you probably have like some idea of timing for, of resource consumption for, stuff like that. Then you have your workload, which is, you know, would be measurable by taking, you know, wait stats, looking at wait stats and Blitz first, looking at file performance, looking at drive performance and Blitz cache with the disk stalls and everything. And the method that I use to do sort of workload benchmarking, I have a blog post coming up about it, is I use OStress from the Microsoft's RML utilities called by agent jobs, and just this endless loop of cycling hell. It's just constantly running some read queries, some write queries, and some tempdb contention-causing queries, or trying to cause tempdb contention queries, to kind of give you a good idea of, well, just to give me a good idea of how this workload runs in different cloud VMs. So like stepping up different disks and different CPUs and different, you know, adding RAM and stuff like that. Just sort of like stepping things up and sometimes to the side to figure out, you know, what got me the performance that I needed or wanted from the cloud.
What I love about it is when it's something like OStress that's repeatable, that all you have to do is just keep running these jobs, especially through like agent jobs. With things like Google Compute Engine, you can simply shut the VM down, go change the amount of resources, spin it right back up, so your tests are really repeatable over and over again. Man, with cloudless machines, as Erik likes to call them, that's so much harder, because it's not like you can just shut down a physical SQL server, throw a bunch more memory in it, change its storage configuration, change its CPU configuration, then spin it back up. It's a giant pain in the rear.
Unless you just do it by setting like max server memory and
yeah. Yeah,
Don't
turning
do that.
on hyper-threading.
But I did want to mention, though, before we get too far into anything, everything that we did with the testing is open source. So we're going to be releasing the database and the stored procedures and the OSTRES and the agent jobs that call the OSTRES commands and everything to you, the public, so that if you want to, obviously, because the cloud changes so fast, as Richie found out this morning. What you're writing a white paper about something this week may not even hold up in a week or a month from now. So we're open sourcing everything, all the work we did on it. So in the future, if you have, if Google or whoever spins up some amazingly different instance type or some crazy new hardware or whatever, you'll be able to test stuff on the newer stuff as well and see how it compares to the older stuff.
And you can take everything that we're doing and repeat it on other cloud providers. If you want to go do it in Amazon, if you want to go do it in Microsoft, if you're using a private cloud, there's a company that I'm working with this week that is working with private cloud stuff. Then this way you can just go repeat your exact same stuff over there and see what you learned.
You can even do it locally too. If you have a physical box that you want to bang stuff up against and figure out, okay, if I spent X amount of dollars on hardware and licensing in this cloudless setup, how much would I have to spend in the cloud to get commensurate or better performance? And lots of cool stuff to do in there.
So folks, we're early in. You feel free to go ahead and put in your questions. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. You can get in your technical questions now. We go first come, first serve. James, Joshua, and Roland already have questions in. So I know sometimes folks like to wait until the last minute and then throw all their questions in at once. We probably won't get to those, so make sure you put in your questions right away.
Or else.
Richie says, as his title here is 75 degrees is cold. So what is the beautiful weather in Miami today?
Look at that. Look at that. See, I'm actually wearing pants. I'm wearing track pants and long sleeves. This is ridiculous.
But that long sleeve, that looks like a technical fabric. That looks like the really thin.
Yeah.
So a piece of advice.
Fit stuff.
Yeah, from people who actually have like winter, I will tell you that stuff's not known for warmth. You may want to, peel the covering off your chair and wrap that around yourself. That may help a little better.
Yeah, well, it's 75 degrees cold. It's not 65 degrees cold. Then I'd do that for 65. But 75, we do what we can.
We're having a warm spell here in Chicago. It was 39 when I woke up this morning. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, wow.
Just gorgeous out.
Check you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty warm here, too. I haven't been outside yet, but I've heard stories. Fabulous tales.
Yeah, I haven't been outside since Saturday, so there you go.
You haven't been outside since Saturday?
I guess I take that back because we did go yesterday to take my wife to the doctor.
You're not running.
I haven't run since Saturday, so there you go. It's been cold. It's like I roll over, it's 55 degrees, and I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
Nope. I had the alarm set up for 5:30, 5:45, 6 o'clock this morning. Did not happen. I am like, no, I am not rolling out of this warmth.
But you'd be running, so you'd warm up pretty quick.
But I got to go out there first, and then I warm up. See, that's the problem.
It's an awkward temperature for running. I mean, it's that valley between like 45 and 55 is really bad. When it gets down colder than that, I mean, I see all kinds of people out running because they just know they're going to have to go face the day regardless, so they strap on 14 layers of technical clothes.
And
performance
at 50, you've got to warm up. It's too warm to wear the pants, so you've got to warm up, and that 15 minutes of actually warming up, that kills me. I'm like, actually getting out of bed cold, it kills me more. So if I get out of bed, I usually go out and do it, but getting out of bed.
That's Richie.
Yeah, getting out of bed just kills Richie. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We got James here says, I'm a mid-level DBA. I think that's kind of like a mid-level manager. He's a kind of sort of a DBA. We do not currently use AlwaysOn. However, is it worth learning the technology? And how many of your clients use AlwaysOn? Erik, what do you think? Is it worth learning the technology?
Oh, it's always worth learning. Whether it's worth implementing, whether it's worth sort of emotional pain that you can go through, where every time you think you know what's going on with your availability group, you don't actually know what's going on with your availability group. Like I think we've said a million times before, at least I have on during office hours and to clients, is I'm an idiot. I can set up an availability group. It is dead simple to set up. What sucks and what's hard is when they break. So as soon as an availability group breaks, or as soon as you have to make hard decisions about bringing a an async replica online, or just all sorts like how do you know if the primary data center goes down, what do you do? That's where availability groups get hard. So learning how to set one up is easy. Learning how to keep one up and learning what to do when something goes wrong with one is where it's all the hard stuff. So worth learning, yeah, worth implementing. It's your coronary.
And you have to think about what the real cost is. Tara writes about this in her white paper on the Google Cloud or Google Compute Engine stuff. She says you really have to have a staging environment that's separate. You have to rehearse everything in the staging environment, be comfortable with how things work. The second part of your question was how many of our clients use AlwaysOn Availability Groups. I don't know, like ballpark on a percentage. I think on a percentage is probably fairly low. But you have to remember that we're kind of an emergency room for SQL Server. People either come in when the performance is bad or when it's unreliable. When people come in for unreliable SQL servers, it is often always-on availability groups that they can't understand why failovers happen, for example.
Just to add a little bit to that, I've never recommended availability groups to anyone. So we, part of our critical care, we can, do some HADR architecture, spec talk. I have never once recommended availability groups to a client, and beyond that, I think the percentage of clients using them is a much different percentage than clients who are using them happily. So whereas I'd say maybe 3 to 4% of clients are using them, there's an even smaller percentage who are like, we're psyched, this is going great. You're going to have your face on.
It's often the reason why they're calling. There's a problem with it. And I don't believe it's that the technology is broken, it's just hard. But there's a wizard, and it looks like you can just step through the wizard and you're done. And people are like, oh, that wasn't so hard. What's the big deal with that? Man, it's what happens afterward that's harder. Josh asks, I have SQL Server 2012 Expensive Edition, as we like to call it. He says there's a difference in execution plans between two different servers, between dev and QA. I've tried making everything identical. What else can I look for that would cause execution plans to be different? He's ruled out clearing the plan cache, my set connection options, so the hardware is the same, partition tables and indexes are identical. What would you guys look at?
God, different execution plans.
Look at the stats.
I like it, yeah, because what if the databases aren't from the same point in time? What if there's been changes to them? What if one of them updated stats and the other one didn't? Sure. That can hugely make a difference.
Yeah, I'd double check other settings too. Like I would just make sure like max stop and cost threshold are in the same place. I would make sure that all that stuff is sort of floating around the same area. Just to what do they call it? Dot the I's and cross the T's.
I would also say, too, that there's a really cool tool built into Management Studio 2016 that lets you compare execution plans. If you Google for, and I'm not just saying that because today's like Google Day, if you Google for compare execution plans with SQL Server 2016, it'll show you what the differences are, or show you what's unequal, and it can be things like the cardinality estimator, not on 2012, but it'll show you all the differences between the plan, like what influenced it to do different things. Really, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, one thing that might be even fun to try is see if there's any like hinting or whatever you can use to get the plan to be the same. So you can so that way, like, if it's like a difference in a join type, try forcing the join type. If it's a difference in join order, try forcing the join order to see maybe why that other server isn't picking it. You may find that for some reason, somehow, that plan on that other server is getting a different cost estimate or something.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Roland says, I'm running an always-on availability group with 2 nodes in synchronous mode. Okay, could running a checkDB on the secondary replica somehow affect the primary replica? Yes. It's going to slow things down. Yes. If you're doing inserts, updates, and deletes against the primary, and then the secondary isn't responding to writes as quickly, yeah, unfortunately, that is going to slow down the secondary, or slow down the primary.
Another thing that could be happening is if you were one of those weird people who has an AG and still has a SAN behind it, you could be sucking all that DBCC checkDB data through the SAN that the other AG is sort of sharing that same pipe or disk, whatever boobity bobbity, and things are just kind of beating each other up there. Don't make that face, Richie. Boobity bobbity is a perfectly technical term for I/O.
Someone has a young daughter. That's all I'm saying.
It's like a SpongeBob thing.
It's like a bibbity boppity boo.
Right. It's the thingamabob that does the job.
A VM host too. If they're on the same VM host, that would be horrible for other reasons. But Dimitri asks, is convert, if I do a convert function in a where or a join, is that still going to be sargeable?
Only for some things, not for all things. So the one that he explicitly asked about was date time. So there is a special optimizer rule built in for date-to-date time conversions where SQL can still use an index and still do a seek because the leftmost part of the date is still part of the histogram and all that. So SQL can still do all sorts of nice stuff with just the date part of the date time. It doesn't work as well for all converts, casts and whatnot.
The thing that's tricky is it may still do a seek, but the estimates can be wrong. In one of our classes, I show the using that convert date, and it gets a seek, but it only estimates one row instead of like 4,000. Tim says, what are some ways to speed up log shipping to an off-site read-only standby with an app that can create hundreds of transactions even on a simple order lookup? How can I make log shipping? I guess what he's really asking is, can I write, golly, so if you can't write less to the log file, is there a way to speed up pushing that log data to another location?
It depends on which part's slow, I guess. I'm like, you could take more frequent log backups.
Yeah,
I think smaller logs across. I would rather send a 10 or 30-second length of data across, or log of data across, than 5 or 10 minutes. I think that's going to help, but I don't know how often you're taking them now.
And if you're worried about latency, that makes me think that maybe you're querying the secondary, in which case taking more faster log backups isn't going to help a whole lot unless you're kicking people out every time you do a restore.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Clark asks, as a DBA who only became comfortable with virtual servers running Microsoft SQL, do I now have to swallow the red or blue pill and learn cloud-based servers? If yes, where do I start? My current employer would never agree to cloud-based anything. No, if you're not doing it, don't go learn it. No. If the company won't accept it, don't bother learning it. You got enough things to learn. Focus on the things that will make you more valuable at your employer.
And,
if you want a new employer.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're really passionate about cloud computing and cloud database, then by all means, start spinning stuff up, start learning it. But if you're comfortable where you're at, you like where you're at, and you like what you're doing, there's really no need.
One thing I will say is that the perfect cure for interest in the cloud is learning the cloud. So.
Oh my God! Suddenly I'm scared. Hold me. Yeah, poor Richie's been spending the last 2 days, 3 days, really since Friday, I think, struggling with
It was Friday, yeah.
Yeah, struggling with an ugly
But
problem.
it's been multiple build systems in multiple projects, so it hasn't just been the one, it's been multiple. And then trying to get all that automated because of so much documentation everywhere and how to do this stuff. You just have to figure it out.
And we have a company Slack chat room where everybody goes in and chats, and one of the things that goes into one of the rooms is Richie's failed builds, so we all get to see whenever Richie's builds are failing. Renee says, I have a server with 4 physical CPUs, each of which has 10 cores. I've got a data warehouse. Should I line up the number of data files with the number of CPU cores that I have? Should I have 40 data files for my data warehouse?
I don't think that's going to do much for you. I wouldn't even say that for TempDB. No. I can imagine, because I only mentioned TempDB because I can imagine that sort of thinking sort of coming from having one TempDB data file per core. So that's why I say that.
You'll sometimes read Microsoft Fast Track data warehouse reference architectures, and they'll do crazy stuff like that because they're trying to drive 100% CPU use across lots of storage fabrics, and that's really a different kind of crazy town, but that's fairly rare to see. I don't think I've ever seen anybody with more than 10 files per file group, and they didn't like it even when they had 10. Let's see. Justin says, back in the SQL 2008 and 2012 days, it's still the SQL 2008 and 2012 days. We're still here.
Some of
I
our
believe
clients, it's still 2008.
Tara, I think, answered a SQL Server 2000 question today on Slack or on Stack Overflow. I'm like, ugh. He says, I
No.
believe you guys recommended running Windows 2012 over Win 2008. Do you have a similar recommendation regarding on what OS you should run SQL Server 2016 on? Nah, it doesn't make a difference to me. Win 2012 versus Win 2016.
Yeah, like unless you're chasing like failover clusters or something else, there are a few advantages to 2016. Like you can now do rolling cluster upgrades and some other cool stuff. And I believe that if you're running availability groups, Windows 2016 is the only one that supports the distributed transactions.
Oh,
for
yeah.
availability groups. So there
Yeah,
are some advantages to Windows 2016, but generally I don't think I care all that much, as long as it's not 2008 or 2003.
Yeah. Let's see. Wes says, I have a bad question. We'll be the judge of that. Do you guys lock the SA account and replace it with a new SA in order to hide the 0x01 user? Is there anything that I should think about there? No, I don't ever do that.
I've disabled SA a couple times just to check off an audit box, but never made a difference.
I don't feel massively secure. My bigger problem is usually that everybody in the shop has the SA password. It's like on every Post-it note everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, can I please get that culturally changed? And they say no.
Like and the two things I always notice is one, well, at my last job when I walked in, I asked my boss for the SA password, and he said it's on the whiteboard by the developer section. And then the other thing is, and this is something that's always irked me a little bit. I say a little bit because I go back and forth on it, but everyone in Management Studio saves their password, right? Because no one wants to go do something if you're using SQL logins. If you're using Windows off, it's obviously doesn't matter, but logging in with SA, most people will save the password. And I have a little bit of gripe with that because then anyone, if you leave your workstation unlocked, they just open up Management Studio, they go right in from your workstation. So just as a best practice for you, unless you have those like crazy SA passwords that you can't remember because it's all like hyphen parentheses, blah, 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 then try not to save them.
Yeah.
Well, I just put it on a sticky note and post it on my monitor so I don't forget.
Keyboard.
Yeah.
Nice. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ryan says, we're running SQL 2012 SP2 CU14. Now, come on now. What if you have to name that? I think I'm already in trouble.
If you have to name that, why aren't you on SP3?
Good point. For CU14. Our software vendor certifies what SQL Server version we can run on. They just certified 2014, and we expect them to finish certifying 2016 sometime this year. Performance is fine, but some execution plans suffer. Would you wait until 2016 is certified, or are the improvements in the cardinality estimator in 2014 worth making the change for now?
I'd wait.
Yeah, me too. And what are your reasons behind waiting?
There are just enough bells and whistles and improvements to the cardinality estimator between 2014 and 2016 that I would just wait it out. There is no sense at this point upgrading to a version behind current, especially Microsoft is getting into such an aggressive life cycle for SQL Server. It sounds like vNext is going to be an every 2-year thing now. We're not going to see those we're not going to see like long waits between major versions. So I would be very careful with that. And I would just not intentionally put myself behind a version.
And if I do it, I only want to do it once. I don't want to go through it in 2014 and then go through it again in 2016. Rosemary says, I have a question about applying the wrong service pack. Well, don't do that. She says, on a 2-node cluster, someone's applied the wrong service pack for the passive node. Now the cluster won't fail over. Is the only solution to uninstall the wrong instance from the passive node and then reinstall it with the right binaries? Based on and I'm skipping like 5 lines out of your question, call support. Call Microsoft support. It's $500. They'll work the problem with you till it's done. But frankly, if someone did something that incredibly stupid, like they implied the wrong version of SQL Server across, I would take this advantage to go build a new node in the cluster that I was going to then go fail over to. Just something brand new from scratch that I know is going to be reliable. If someone that incompetent screwed up your service pack, God only knows what else they installed on the SQL Server, like in our recent engagement at Google where we accidentally infected our domain controller with a virus. That would be Erik Darling.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Get something off of BitTorrent, we said. How hard can it be, we said.
No torrenting on my end.
Tim asks, when you guys build a new server, how big of a drive do you create for the system databases, master, model, and MSDB?
I don't ever separate those from other stuff.
Where do you put them?
I put them in with whatever other data files and log files I'm going to have for my user databases. I might have a system folder on that drive, but I don't ever separate them out for anything. TempDB is the only one that gets its own good boy drive.
Jonelle asks, if you set max DOP at the instance level, the max degree of parallelism, if you set it at 1, does that disable parallelism unless you provide a query hint?
Yes.
Yes. Ouch.
Or unless you're on 2016 and you set it at the database level. There are database scoped configurations for such things. Which is weird because they do it for max DOP but not for cost threshold, right?
Right.
Like there's no so
and
that's no server level and then
yeah, I wrote a blog post recently on all the ways you can set max DOP, and I think it was like 13 or 16 different ways that you can influence parallelism just by different settings. It's crazy how many things you can tweak it with. Erik says, is it... What? Yeah, different Erik. Different Erik. It's his. He doesn't know how to spell Erik correctly. He says, is it possible that a statement with a begin transaction that uses TempDB that is left hanging can hold the TempDB log file hostage and eventually cause it to fill up and bring its SQL Server to its knees? If so, I find this disturbing.
Welcome to SQL.
Yep, bad news. Yes, that is possible. It's kind of sad. I say kind of sad. It's not like I've ever run into that. Like the problem for me hasn't been the log file; it's been the data file. Some yo-yo dumping a huge thing into TempDB, like trying to join 50 tables together. Well, it's not always Richie. It's just sometimes Richie. Less often now that he's doing work in Postgres. Yes. Tim says, yeah, we have, that's a follow-up from an earlier one, okay. Guillermo says, every time I start copying a mid to large size file from one of my SQL servers to another, I see the server starts paging wildly. Why is this?
Oh, I did this to a server once. If you look back shamefully, I have a Stack Exchange query, but I did it with PowerShell, and I was using the move item command. And I was moving a bunch of data files around, and one of them happened to be like 500 gigs. And as soon as I did that, the server just stopped. It was like no one could get in, nothing. It just stopped dead, and it stopped until the file finished moving. And that was because Windows tasks like that, and so like file system stuff, and PowerShell, and even like Xcopy or RoboCopy, they don't give a single care about your SQL memory. They see the memory available on the server, and they're like, I'm going to buffer this whole file. I'm going to move it over. I don't care. So that's why it's very important that when you move files on SQL, you do it very carefully, and you not hit Control-C and Control-V to do it. And even just like dragging and dropping a file from one place to another can cause trouble if it's big enough.
Honey Badger Windows don't care.
Does not care. Takes all of your memory. If you're playing around with command line stuff like Xcopy, look into unbuffered. There's an unbuffered switch you can use for Xcopy.
I think RoboCopy has a similar one that I started using as well. Where you
don't mention that power thing again, please, Erik. Please,
I mentioned it as little as possible.
We're not on speaking terms right now.
Well, especially it's so illustrative. You can just trash servers so much more quickly. That's not true. That's kind of true.
It is true.
Heather says a colleague recently recommended that we should move indexes to a different file group because reorgs and rebuilds cause gaps. Is there any merit to this suggestion? That's incredible.
Gaps? And what?
when you say, oh, I guarantee I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, I have, like, say, 100 gigs that's all completely full, and I want to rebuild a 50 gig index, that it's going to pick up that index and move it to the empty space at the end, and there's going to be a 50 gig hole at the beginning. So theoretically, this could be true if you have one dominant object in the database, one object that takes, say, half of the database or more. But if you have, to keep the numbers simple, 10 things in your database that are all equally sized, you're not rebuilding them all simultaneously. You're rebuilding them one at a time, and you're leaving free space behind. Is there going to be a gap? Yes, even if you put it in a different file group, there will still be a gap. Now, unless you get fancy and go back and forth between file groups or something. But tell that colleague of yours to stick with the other department that their primary job description is in, management, for example, but keep out of the database.
Yeah, because that's one of those bananas things where it's like, how is that even going to change anything? Because SQL is just going to read that from disk into memory anyway, right?
And it kills me that people forget what RAM stands for. RAM doesn't stand for sequential access memory. It stands for random access memory.
Well, how old is that server? I mean, is it like SQL Server 6.5 or something? I mean,
or how old is the colleague, too?
Goodness.
When I was your age, and I had to get the data.
I said that this week.
What made you say that?
Cloud.
Oh. When I was your age, I would have gone into the data center and beat it with a hammer, a stone hammer, not PowerShell, the real original stone hammer.
When I was your age, I did builds on my own machine, and I liked it.
I really liked it because I could go do something else while my code was compiling.
That's right. That's right. I went and got coffee.
Guillermo asks a controversial question. There's no controversy with me, but Guillermo says, what's your stance on enabling XP command shell on SQL Server?
I don't care. If you got to use it, you got to use it. You're not any better off enabling or using XP command shell than you are if you were to replace that with, say, using PowerShell and an agent step or something. It's just not. Plus, as a guy who has had to do a lot of dumb things with SQL Server, I have used XP command shell to do many of them. My proudest moment was using XP command shell to build a cookie, and then use the cookie and call the curl to download a file, and then load that file into a table. And I was so psyched on that. It was like, I don't know why everyone hates XP command shell.
That's
SQL Server
cool.
is a perfect place to do it.
Learn a programming language, Eric.
I tried to learn PowerShell because everyone on
learn a programming language, not script kiddie stuff.
It's just like, just write a quick PowerShell script to do it. And I'm like, yes, quick PowerShell script. And then 4 days later, I'm like sitting there in a pile of broken keyboards with like punches through my monitor and like teddy bear heads ripped off and quick PowerShell script my foot.
Well, my thing is with XP command shell is like, should you be doing it in a database at all? Maybe this should be somewhere else other than the database.
I agree, but sometimes these tasks have to interact with the database, right? Like sometimes you do have to move a file, and then you can't do anything in the database until the file is done moving.
That's stuff why we have SDKs to talk to databases with these programming languages. You see how that works?
Who do? DBAs who don't know C# and don't have the time to learn C#.
ADO.net's been around for, I don't know, over 15 years. I mean, I think it's pretty stable.
I learn XP command shell.
Here it comes. When I was your age.
When I was your age.
I would ask, this does bring up a good point, what do you need XP command shell for? That is the thing that I usually ask, like, are they trying to implement some kind of automation that's really best done in another language or in an app server? I was talking to a DBA recently who even does file unzipping through XP command shell. I'm like, this may not be the best use of CPU cycles on SQL Server's licensing.
7-zip CLI?
PKZip 204G. When I was your age.
I can do that in Azure Functions. Just saying. Or Lambda.
When I was your age, we didn't have Lambda.
Yeah, that's right.
Dimitri says, speaking for file groups, if all my storage is on a SAN, does it make any difference for performance to have data and indexes on different file groups?
Not unless they're on totally different spindles, or I guess maybe if you have like a real fancy SAN and they're routed through different storage paths, then maybe. Through different network storage paths, rather, not the other thing.
that was the reason we always talked about it in the old days when I was your age. We would put the data on one set of drives and the indexes on another. So the theory was you could read from the data and rebuild the indexes faster, like if you're reading from one set of spindles and writing to the other. These days, kids seem to have this really fancy concept called memory. They put a lot of their data up in memory, so then they don't have to read from disks in order to write to disks. But I don't know. It's just to give you the live broadcast, 64 gigs of RAM there in that desktop, and mine is a chump compared to Eric's, who has 128 gigs of RAM in his desktop, ladies and gentlemen.
Wouldn't it be cool if SQL accepted like weird slang for date expressions? Like when I was your age,
we could
like
write
back in the day. Like it would just interpret it, so like based on like your age and mindset.
Yeah,
my barber's like an old guy, and he always says stuff like there was a time and back in the day. Like every sentence starts with it, or it's like nowadays. Nowadays we like get 8 minus 7 or something.
Did the HTML tag flash actually work, right? Did the marquee tag work when it scrolled across, right? Blink, how's that?
Nice.
No, because it is a structured English query language, so I think it should start to accept a wider variety of terms to express dates.
Yesteryear.
Yeah.
You want to make things more complex for DBAs? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, for
No,
developers.
just developers.
Oh, okay. Well, then sure, fine. Why not? I mean, we're not updating things every 2 weeks now, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
No one depends on that stuff.
Neil says, have you guys had any experience with high concurrent connections having max worker threads run out of idle threads? And is there a reason why I should increase max worker threads?
No.
Why no? Why no?
Well, we have, I think we have a joint blog post coming up about this soon. About how so like max worker threads, it sounds like one of those settings. It's like, oh, if I just had some more worker threads, everything would be fine because I'm running out of them. The problem is when you add worker threads, you don't add CPUs, you don't add CPU resources. Those threads are all now competing on the same CPUs you had before. So now we're like, your workload may not fall off into the abyss and just like your server may not stop responding, but it's going to get really close because all those threads are going to be running on CPUs and slowing down and sucking at life.
Had one client who set max worker threads at like 3,000, and they actually had that many queries running simultaneously, and they didn't get. I said, all right, now divide out the number of cores you have and that number of worker threads. If they're all active and they could make progress, think about how little CPU time they get, because they just go on for 4 milliseconds of CPU time and then step off the line for someone else to execute. They take longer, not shorter, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. What you really want to do is if you are consistently running out of worker threads and you can't add CPUs, is start looking at parallelism, because parallelism is one of the biggest consumers of threads on most servers that I see. So either like cutting maxstop in half. If it's at 8, cut it to 4. If it's 4, cut it to 2. Maybe boosting cost threshold up. But those are short-term artificial ways to do it until you have time to do like the query and index tuning you have to do so that queries don't have to go parallel anyway.
Bingo.
And again, that's a performance hit too, because now these queries that either we're going parallel before and aren't going now, or we're using more cores and finishing faster now, we're using less and taking longer. So in any situation with max worker threads and all this other stuff, you're going to slow stuff down until you make it better. There's no great solution aside from
Renee asks, do you guys have a rule of thumb on how many VLFs are too many and how do you minimize them? Yeah, run SP Blitz. SP Blitz warns you, and we warn you when it's over 1,000, not because that's bad, but we want you to fix it before you get up to 15,000, 20,000. And there's a link in there on how you go about fixing those. Really quick and easy fixes there.
Mm-hmm.
Ben says, I use SP Blitz Index against a somewhat high transaction DB. Okay, quick podium moment here. Everything you work with will always seem like high transactions or high size. Never use those terms. Instead, use real numbers. He says SP Blitz Index will display 5 high-value missing indexes for a specific table, but then I do an index rebuild or reorg on Sundays, and those 5 suggestions just disappear. Why do they come and go?
Because they're karma chameleons.
Karma.
Just kidding. I look nothing like Boy George today. during the day. So when you, it's sad and sad. So in SQL Server 2012 is the only one that still has it for limited versions of 2012 because it got fixed in Service Pack 3, I think. But there was a bug that happened between 2008 R2 and just hit 2012 where every time you rebuild an index, it clears out the DMVs for that index, so like all the usage and the missing index stuff. I want to say Kendra has a blog post about exactly on littlekendra.com about which versions and which commands still reset certain counters. I want to say that maybe the rebuild thing still might clear out missing index stuff, but it doesn't clear out other DMV counters. There's something wonky about it. I'm glad you wrote down for me. But I would check there and get the full list. But that's the reason why. So stop rebuilding indexes.
There you go. All right, let's see. Next up, Guillermo says, for high availability for SQL Server, what's your preferred method between failover clustered instances or availability groups? I'm going to take away his restriction, and I'm going to say any high availability mechanism, and we'll each give answers. Eric, what's your favorite and why?
Just talked.
Richie, what's your favorite and why?
Favorite.
I'll answer. So my favorite high availability solution is usually either VMs, just a single VM, because it's easy. It's not perfect. There are all kinds of things it doesn't really protect you from if someone drops a table, if someone hoses up a patch. But it just is kind of free high availability, especially for your older stuff that you can't afford to reinstall or buy a fancy pants edition for. Barring that, I like failover clustered instances a lot because they're really similar to what they've been around for years, so it's easy to get books and training on those.
Cloud databases.
What'd you say?
Cloud databases.
Cloud databases. Oh, that's such a good answer. So.
Whoa, did you cut out?
No,
yeah.
Elaborate. Oh, yeah, elaborate on it.
You cut out on me.
I was like, oh, not another stroke.
Well, so you have in a Azure SQL database, you have multiple copies when you spin it up. So if one fails, it jumps to the next one and starts rebuilding another one. So that's free. It's out of the box. So you spin it up and it's there. It's the cheapest way to get HA, right?
How about you, Eric?
Actually, I'm going to expand a little bit on what you said. My favorite setup of all time is the failover cluster with log shipping, because that gives you HA and DR outside, and log shipping doesn't get any easier than log shipping. If you screw up log shipping, God help you with anything else.
It's pretty bulletproof. Doesn't rely on Windows domains, anything like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the guys over at Madeira Data, Guy Glancer, just wrote a blog post on building always-on availability groups without a domain controller. And he does a 3-node always-on availability group with no domain controller, just in work groups. And the checklist to do it is probably 10 pages long if you go print it out. So, Guy Glancer, and we'll put that link in the show notes. And it's actually in this week's Monday links too as well. I was like, oh, everybody needs to see this. It's crazy. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out with us at this week's Office Hours. We will see you guys next Wednesday. Adios, everybody.